We'll get started. There still seems to be some difficulty, but we're recording this session, so for those of you on the line, we'll get to enjoy it in person, and we can share it with others in our network if we're not able to solve all of the technical challenges that we're having. So let me start off by saying good morning and introducing myself. All of you know me. I'm Ruben Felipe, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Charter Schools Association, and I want to welcome you to the second webinar in our 2020 summer series. We're glad to see you all. As we did last week, like I just mentioned, we'll be recording the webinar and posting it and any related materials to the webinar section on our website. We'll also field questions after the presentation using the chat or Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Before we dive in, I just want to give a really brief update. Yesterday was a State Board of Education meeting. There were two charter related items on the agenda. The first being an extension of 1 year to every charter school that has a renewal of less than 5 years. As you guys know, statutorily 5 years is the longest renewal period. So for the 3 schools that have 5-year renewals, they will remain at 5 years. Every other school will get an additional year added to their renewal, and effectively that will effectively eliminate renewals next year. So there will not be schools up for renewal in 2021. Secondly, there was a vote to a material change the Stanford Excellence's charter. Essentially, they've been expanded to a pre-K to 6th grade school. The school, as many of you know, is amongst the highest performing schools in the entire state, and was seeking a pre-K to 8 designation. They didn't receive that, but they got the 6th grade that was the immediate need for next year, and so we'll be working with them to push to get to their final growth of pre-K to 8. And then lastly, there is a special session that we've talked about and you've seen in the update emails. Looks like it's going to happen in earnest next week. It looks like the House may go in sometime towards the end of next week to deal with specifically a policing bill, policing bill, absentee ballot access in the fall, and a couple of other minor, I guess best described as housekeeping issues. Nothing at this point on education or on the budget itself. And then the Senate is scheduled for the following week to take on whatever's passed in the House. So we'll keep you posted through our regular updates. And of course, as always, we're continuing our fight to make sure the charter line item is not cut, and in fact that we can increase it. We've had 2 virtual meetings with legislators this week, which brings us up to around 8 in the last, 5 or 6 weeks. If your school community hasn't met virtually with your delegation yet, and you'd like to do so, please let us know, either in the chat today or just reach out to us separately. So without all that being said, I want to move to the focus of today's conversation. This week, we're going to focus on best practices in remote hiring in the current context. We have heard from many school leaders that this is something that you're thinking about a lot and experimenting with, and are interested in hearing from experts about how to best adapt your hiring. So I'm joined today by Jonathan Howard, who's the Vice President of School Experience and Growth. I will let Jonathan talk about the work he does and give you a little context on himself and his organization, and then we'll get into the presentation. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to Jonathan Howard.
All right, thanks so much, Ruben. Appreciate it. Appreciate you all having me. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to conduct effective virtual teacher interviews and demos. Then I've also added just some, I'm calling it bonus content on just some lessons learned on school brand and how to market your school brand. once again, just thanks so much for being here. So I'm Jonathan Howard. Like Ruben said, I'm the VP of School Experience for Selected. A little bit of information on Selected. So we are an online, we offer an online platform that makes it really easy for you schools to get matched and connected with teachers that are relevant to you. So teachers that are actively looking for roles in your location, actively looking for your type of school and for your grade levels. So here's just a little bit of information. And if you're not currently using Selected, or if you've never heard of it, you can actually jump on and try it for free with a free trial. But we'll share my information later. And if you need help with hiring, I encourage you to reach out and have a conversation. Just really quickly to, just so I can get an idea of who is here, but in the chat feature, wherever it is on your screen, usually at the bottom, unless you moved it, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your school name, and eager to hear if there are any roles you're still looking to fill for 2021. Let's take like 30 seconds and do that. Everyone finding the chat feature?
For folks who are advocates, you can mention the schools that you work with, and then also the organization you represent.
Laura, thanks. Brass City Charter School, awesome. Thanks for being here. Anybody else? Hi, Shelly. Hyattville Charter. Cool. Hi, Nakia. And Booker T. Washington. Awesome, awesome, great. And awesome, thank you so much. So we'll, so just a few things to keep in mind as we go through here. Feel free to use the chat to share just any insights or best practices you have just on hiring. If you've been doing it for a while, especially virtually, if you have things to share, I find that's how we learn best from the experience of others. And then I also want you all to think about how teachers find you. Like how does your school get discovered in the sea of schools that you're competing with out there? Quick agenda. So we'll go through just sort of some high level virtual interviewing 101 practices. We'll talk about virtual demos. We'll go through some challenges and best practices on virtual hiring. Then, like I said, some bonus content talking about your school brand. So virtual interviewing. So first things first, if you haven't done this already, you need to choose a platform that you're going to use. So we're using Zoom right now. I've been using Zoom pretty much this entire time. Gotten really good with using it. I think it's a great platform. I think they're still offering it for free to educate to schools and education organizations. So highly recommend Zoom, especially for larger meetings. For calls, for like just individual calls, I'll use Google Hangouts a lot. That's worked pretty well. I've had schools that use free conference whereby however, there's a ton of them out there, but Zoom and Google Hangouts are the ones I like to stick to. And and this is a great opportunity to get aligned both for yourself and for your team or whoever's involved with hiring on just aligning on your ideal candidate profile, like who it is. Like this is just the best practice for like all hiring whenever. But specifically who you're looking for, what gaps on your team do you need to fill, and then making sure that you're creating scoring rubrics to, as objectively as possible and equitably as possible, assess candidates. And here's just a quick example of a couple of things that could potentially be on a scoring rubric. Generally, if you have a team of people that are scoring people or multiple people involved in interviewing, it's a good practice to have people fill these out by themselves before you come together as a group, so you can minimize just bias on being influenced by the thoughts of other people before you fill out your profile. And I should also say as well, just feel free to jump in the chat with any messages or any just questions you have as well, or speak out as well. I don't mind being interrupted, so feel free to do that. So process here is also key. So you want to map out your entire hiring and selection process. It's key to also think about it from the candidate perspective and from the interview team perspective. I think a lot of people have figured out, in person, you can kind of just wing it, right? When people are going to show up to your school and interview, and like you might have a process and like you just have a routine and you kind of just remember it. But when it's online and you're doing these things virtually, like you can't wing it, right? Like you got to just do the work up front to just make sure that everything is clear and that folks are set up for success. So, looking at all the key steps from sourcing to how people find you to the hire, and I recommend creating process / expectation documents or emails for each of the different touch points you have, both with candidates and your team. So some examples or some touch points with candidates before the interview, emailing them your expectations docs or just putting it in the email. I recommend, if you have time, to do a quick call with candidates to preview just what's going to happen, just to make sure that they, all their questions are answered, and that they're just set up for success. And then just using the first 5 minutes of any phone interview, just review the process to make sure everybody's clear. This process, as with any hire you do, no matter what situation we're in, you should use your hiring process to sell your school. You want everybody who interviews with you, regardless of whether they get an offer or they end up being hired, to walk away wanting to work at your school. So it's a good opportunity to reflect on the core values and culture, which we'll talk about later, and then just focus on building relationships. This might be somebody that maybe it's not a good fit now for whatever reason. It may be a good fit down the road. And so just building relationships with folks, just using this process to really get to know folks and build relationships. On the candidate setup side, so you just want to make sure your candidate expectations are really clear. Providing video platform instructions. Good news is for like Zoom, there's they do a pretty good job of just giving you that. So things that you can share with candidates, letting them know what to expect during an interview, who's going to be a part of their interview process. If you're so inclined and you have the time, putting together some video intros that you can share with candidates, like for yourself or for folks on the hiring team. Getting testimonials from kids or other staff members. Like, one thing about now is like folks, it's pretty easy to record like a quick 2-minute video and share it. So if you have staff members that can speak highly of the school, or just give folks just a good idea of what it's like to work there, like that's something you can incorporate into your process as well. And just including your phone number as a backup, just in case tech issues come up and candidates have a way to reach you out offline. We're going to share a lot of examples. So after the call, I'll share with Kara just all of this information here, like all of these examples, so you have them. If you want to borrow them, make them your own, feel free. But this is just a quick example of a candidate email template that we put together. If you use any kind of scheduling software like Calendly, it's a good practice to include that. So just so you don't have to continue to go back and forth just to schedule like one call, they can just see your calendar and pick a time. Also just, this is also an opportunity again to insert your core values into your communications with candidates. Another example from one of our partners, ACE Charter Schools out in San Jose, California. This is just what they share with candidates. Again, like that how to join a Zoom meeting link is there. I think that's like a straight Zoom link. And they also even give them a tip on like eye contact, right? So this is very simple, and so whatever you do, like it could be simple and a few bullets like this, or it could be just more in depth. It really depends on just what your process is and what your style is. The interview team prep. So again, very important that your interview team is on the same page, that they understand the platform functionality, that they understand what your norms and expectations are for them, dress code, how you're sharing documents. Are you using Google Docs? Like are you using Box? Making sure that they have access to the candidate materials and have reviewed them beforehand, all those types of things. It's important to set an agenda for interviews. And the good news is you can do this once and just have a template and just reuse it over and over. But one thing you want to definitely make sure you schedule time explicitly, like have calendar invites explicitly for is just scheduling a debrief. What you don't want to happen is you interview a few candidates one day, you don't set up a time to debrief, and next thing you know, like that meeting happens 2 or 3 days later. People might have forgotten or they didn't take good notes, and schedule those as soon as possible so you can get together as a team to discuss candidates. Plus, you want to get back to candidates in a timely manner and move folks forward, hopefully. Quick example of just interview team guidelines. You're going to want to make sure that you take some time to to actually take the time to test this with your team. Make sure everything's working properly. Another thing to highlight is just during interviews, just making sure that people are clear on being present and free of distractions. It's very easy when especially if you're not the person leading it or speaking, to get distracted on your phone or something like that. And especially if you're on camera, right? People can see you if you're over here off doing something, right? So just make sure that you're present and free of distractions when you're interviewing folks. Another just quick interview team prep example from another one of our partners, Alliance College Ready Public Schools. This is what they share with their interview team to set them up for video interviews. There's one more example from Neighborhood Charter Schools. They actually have gone through and just sort of listed out each step, who's responsible, actually how long it's going to take, just to give people an idea of like how long, what to expect as far as time is a good best practice. And one good example of just school culture. So Avenue is the World School. They do a great job of just incorporating their culture and making it clear to candidates that is important to them in their process. So this is just a quick snapshot of something that they share with candidates. They actually explicitly say like you're not required to make any explicit connection to the Avenues World elements in your own video or lesson plans, but if you'd like to, so they encourage it, right? So it's definitely something that was important to them. But the key is they have done a lot of work to actually like create these things and build their entire just organizational structure around them, and so that they want to make that apparent in their hiring process for folks that they're bringing on board. So virtual demo lessons. Been a few months now, so I've heard lots of stories, good and bad, just lots of lessons learned around virtual demo lessons. But really, you have to just figure out, like, again, going back to your when you look at your process, what is important, like what do you need to see from candidates in order to make it as good an assessment as you can on their ability, right? So again, the process is key, making sure that you have clear guidelines and directions for candidates. I lean toward option one. If someone has a video, lots of teachers now, especially folks that are have more recently gone through like teacher preparation programs are more likely to have some sort of teaching video where you can see them interact with kids. If they have one, like great. It's actually, I think, saves time because you don't have to schedule a meeting with get a bunch of people together to be present at the same time for a live virtual demo. But again, a live virtual demo is an option, right? A lot of people do, a lot of schools do want to have that live interaction. I've heard of, I've seen schools actually have kids participate. So kids log into Zoom, like the teacher's actually teaching kids virtually. They've done it where they are pretending to be kids. There's all sorts of different ways you can go about doing it. Also varies by grade level. I've heard a lot of elementary schools are just giving folks like a read aloud passage, and they do like a quick 10-minute read aloud, to the interview team. But it really depends on what what's going to work for you. Some things to include in your demo video guidelines, just being clear on how long the video should be, how to share it. So you can create private channels on YouTube and Vimeo to just share. How do they share a lesson plan? Do you want a lesson plan? Do you want certain student work samples? And then also just the timeline by which they should submit it. I see there's a chat, so I'm gonna check the chat real quick. Laura asked, have you heard anything from candidates about how they feel doing virtual demos as opposed to in person? Yes. So we actually get a lot of teachers reaching out saying, hey, I got this virtual interview. Do you have any do you have any suggestions? I think there was more of that sort of at the beginning of this. I think now that folks have just sort of gotten used to it, it's been better. But I just tell folks, one thing to keep in mind from the school's perspective is to just be mindful that folks may not have an ideal home situation in order to do an interview, right? So, if a kid, some people have kids that they don't have someone to watch, and they may jump into the room or something like that. So just being mindful, both for candidates and for you, right? So just, that's something I think you can talk about on the front end. I'm just saying, hey, totally understand if there are distractions that happen, please don't worry about it. It's not going to impact anything. But outside of that, I think it's aside from sort of getting used to the video, just the virtual interface, and simple things like, hey, look into the camera when you're talking, making sure that you're as in a quiet a place as possible, minding making sure that there's nothing crazy going on in your background, stuff like that. Folks are pretty used to it at this point. I hope that answers, or at least partially answers, your question, Laura. Thank you. Some examples of just recorded demo guidelines, again, from Avenues. They just, sort of just really just lay it out, and we're very clear about what to do. And all the, you could also look at this as part of, as something to rate people on, right? So, if folks, aren't following your explicit instructions, then that could be a data point that impacts, impacts their, whether or not they move forward. Some live demo guidelines, just one quick example. Make sure that if you're asking them to create or modify lesson plan and materials, that you make that clear, the length of the demo lesson, how it's going to be taught. We've included just links to download and familiarize themselves yourself with Zoom. But again, I'll share this, and so you can take this and sort of use it as a baseline and modify it how you see fit. Oh, the last point, to try to stay in character. One of the things that I was hearing a lot from schools was teachers would sort of like, teach and then sort of like jump out of teacher mode and sort of explain sort of what they were thinking, which is, natural, I think, to want to do if you're not like teaching kids. And so I just included that as something that you could include in your guidelines to just make it clear, like, hey, you're going to be teaching for 15 minutes. Like, we know it's kind of awkward, but we're really trying to just hear your teacher voice. And so just pretend that we are kids or whatever the situation is. And, we can, we'll have a chance to debrief and talk more about your thinking afterward. One more example of live demo guidelines from ACE again. So challenges and best practices. So we'll just jump right into these. So challenge number one, virtual interviews can feel impersonal. Makes sense. So a potential solution to that is to share information about your team and expectations for the interview ahead of time. I think I mentioned this earlier, but sending video intro bios of the interview team, just a personal touch on the interview experience. Sharing as much information you can about your school. So again, like I think Avenues, for example, is they just do a great job of, incorporating their school culture into their interview materials. I think that's something that all schools should strive for. And then finally, just walking through the platform full group at the start of any interviews just helps take away just any tension that there could possibly be. Challenge number two, sharing your school culture, really selling your school. So sharing photos, videos. We talked about testimonials for your school community. These are things that you should do anyway, regardless of a virtual hiring situation or not. But a lot of schools are really good at just the social media thing, and it's something that is free to do. It just takes a little bit of time to start regularly posting sort of fun, exciting stuff about your school. But that's just an easy way to just start selling your school culture and getting the word out. Virtual office hours or info sessions. So a lot of schools are sort of, hey, there's no job fairs, no career fairs to go to. Like, how do I like get people to find us or to come learn more about us? And so I've seen a few schools just schedule like regular virtual office hours and just have that like on their site, or just have it, or even like reaching out to folks who've applied in the past and then inviting them just to kind of see who responds and who is interested. But thinking, this is one idea to think about, more additional ways to sell your schools, having just some sort of regularly scheduled office hours or info sessions. Challenge three, it's easy to miss interpersonal cues in virtual hiring. So the solution is just to familiarize yourself with the platform, preferred platforms, virtual features. Zoom is pretty intuitive. They got the little bar, everything's there. Like, for example, I'm looking at it now and I can see there's another chat, so I'm gonna go look at it. And yeah, so, just making sure that you take the time to get get on the same page with your team, and just understand, and making sure that you yourself just understand the functionality. And again, just make sure that you're present on camera. And finally, challenge four, getting your hiring team on the same page. So it's critical that you just meet with the team before. I think that's the most important, is to just take the 15, 20 minutes to just get everybody together, to just test it out, have people share screens. If you don't want people who are just participants sharing screens, making sure that you understand how the settings work, so on and so forth. Just doing a test run. So some additional challenges, assessing behavior management. So what are those things that are harder to assess? Behavior management is probably the most obvious one. Like, that's a huge advantage to being able to have someone come in person and do a demo with your kids to see how they just interact with and just manage kids and systems they sort of set up in their demo lessons. Just wanted to just note that there are additional challenges out there. We're not going to dive into these right now, but they are there. And then sourcing concerns, right? I mentioned that there aren't any job fairs right now, right? I know there's some virtual job fairs happening, but certainly if you have a chance to check out Selected, like we could be a potential option there to help you find and source teachers. And so finally, we're going to talk about school brand. So this is that bonus content I talked about. But how do you market your school brand? So we'll talk about just some four lessons learned as we've been having conversations with schools throughout the last few months. So just defining the problem, really, I talked at the very beginning to think about like, how do folks find you? How do you get discovered? There's a lot of competition out there. There's larger networks, there's districts. I know in Connecticut, there aren't a whole lot of charters. And so I'm imagining that there's a lot of competition just a lot of competition from the school districts where you are. I know there's a lot of private schools. So how do folks discover you? And you're going to want to focus on your unique value proposition. How you can differentiate yourself and stand out. And then really figuring out like what the greatest return on investment is for you. A lot of folks like just post broadly and kind of post everywhere and get thousands of applicants. But really what you want to figure out like, how do you take your ideal candidate profile, like figure out where those people are, what kind of partnerships and connections you can make to get to the relevant folks, because that's where you want to spend your time, with the folks who are relevant and more likely to move forward with you. And then really, there's a lot of things that you can do. It can get really daunting to kind of think about all the different things you can do on top of all the other stuff you're doing right now with your schools. But the point is you want to just keep started or just get started and keep moving and just be patient, right? These things, if you are actively working on them, like you're going to see results. So brand follows culture. So you want to make sure that your school culture is defined. And, I know a lot of schools have done this work. I think the best way to like really see this is looking at your website. So, is your instructional model clear? If I'm a candidate and I don't know your school, like, do I have an idea of like what kind of curriculum you're using, what kind of discipline system you're using? Are those things that we can see and are obvious? Is our culture obvious to folks on your website? And if not, like, that's fine, right? Like, it's just an opportunity to grow. And what you could also do is just look at other schools in your area, like look at the district website, like look at some other schools in your area, what they're going on, look at their social media pages. It's just to get ideas for how to improve your school brand sort of to external audiences. But of course, first, like, you're going to have to do this work, right? And to really define these things clearly. So lesson number 1 is articulating your school brand. You want to show and don't tell, right? Again, like these things should be apparent on your website and social media. What feature, and really think about one thing, like what's the one thing, and maybe it's a couple of things, but what's one thing that uniquely defines what you do? Like, are you do you have an awesome teacher training like fellowship program? Do you offer just amazing professional development? Just a couple of ideas of things to think about. But what do you do better than others? What makes you different? Your long-term goal here is to target the audience, is that your target audience finds you. Like, this is going to save you money. Recruitment, finding folks takes a lot of time and money, right? So, if you start working on these things now and do a good job with them, it's going to save you money in the long term, and folks are going to find you. And again, what is your school's unique value proposition? Like, what can you do that's 10 times better than others and compete on and win? So the example I use is I used to work at Democracy Prep Public Schools, which is a charter network that started in New York, has a bunch of schools around the country. Democracy Prep's brand, their UVP, is a civics program. Like civics is woven into sort of everything you see like externally about Democracy Prep on the website. Just creating like engaged citizens as a part of their model of getting kids to and through college, right? So it's just one example, but there are many others. But you want whatever whatever it is for you, whatever your UVP is. Really, the goal is to like think for folks to eventually get to the point where it's automatic. Like if they say, if your school name is brought up, then oh yeah, like that's the X school, like that's a school that does this, right? That's kind of the goal of where you want to get to. Just quickly, an example of how this kind of works on Selected. So you can curate your audience based on your attributes. So, you all would have one of our Connecticut regions chosen. You would have the grade levels you serve. We actually also do some culture matching, so you could see if candidates are a culture fit before connecting with them, which is really, really nice. Lesson 2. So your online presence equals their first impression. You want to create an experience that delights your ideal audience, right? So again, just looking at your website, who's your ideal candidate? What are they looking for? Are there partnerships? Are there local organizations that you can partner with that could be potential sources of talent in the future? Social media, open houses. Really, like you have to really just sit down and look at folks that you've hired. Like, talk to them. How did you find us? Like, what was it a referral? Was it they saw this interesting post on social media, or they saw a blog? How did they get you sort of backward? Like, start with your best people, start with everybody, and figure out like how folks got to you, and then sort of build. Use that information that you learned from them to build out. Like if people, if everyone, if 5 people told you that they somehow got your blog or were just on your mailing list, and then that's sort of what prompted them to apply, then like that's something you want to sort of double down on and continue doing and figuring out how to get that to more people. So just on Selected, you can filter for a bunch of things. So minimum years experience, grade level, subjects, location, instructional skills. So maybe you want to see folks that have a Montessori background. Like you can filter for up to there's actually like 100 things that you can filter for on here. But it just makes it easy to. We try to make it really easy for you to hone in on exactly who it is you're looking for. And then you also just get a detailed candidate summary. So you actually essentially get a resume preview of candidates before reaching out to them. So we provide a lot of information, location information, just experience, certification, etc. Do they speak another language? What's their proficiency in that language, etc. Lesson 3. So keeping your candidates warm and engaged. It might take, many interactions or emails or just messages in order to get somebody eventually to become a hire. So think about what's your call to action. So whatever the outreach mechanism is, like, what is your goal? Like, do you want to get an email address that you could use to follow up? Do you want them to apply? Do you want them to click on something? Like, think about what your call to action is, and then just your desired results. So that email, someone coming to your blog page, etc. And then one final point here, just thinking about sort of like what that, like how often it happens, right? So the other thing is you don't want to sort of annoy people with stuff, right? So you don't want to send them like an email every week, for example. Maybe it's a once a month thing that you use to follow up, and then you can use things like MailChimp to sort of track open rates and like that kind of stuff to see how effective like your messaging is, so on and so forth. So on Selected, we're just trying to make it really easy to manage workflow. So when you connect with candidates on Selected, so if you're reaching out to candidates, they get an email, they get a text right away, letting them know you're interested. We actually now have job posts as well, so candidates can apply to you through Selected. And then we allow you to save templates. So once someone accepts your connection, you can have a template ready to go to like send them that immediate follow-up, like giving them like next steps on setting up a phone interview or whatever the next step in your process is. But this is just what it looks like. And finally, just lesson 4, it's really important that you measure results. So, you know, you've done all this work already to figure out what your UVP is. You've done all this work to, you know, improve your website and just get more people that get more great people in your pipeline. The final step is like you have to measure what's going on, right? Thinking about your brand as an asset. What is the key result that you're looking for? Is it cost per hire? Is it cost per application? So on and so forth from the different channels that you're using. And you need to be able to compare, right? So if you're using Selected, like you want to be able to compare, you know, us with an Indeed or, you know, wherever else you're posting jobs, or a job fair that you go to every year. What's the return on investment? You want to make sure it's I mean, as with many things, the good thing is that in education, for the most part, like we are already sort of data driven folks, and so this is an easy thing to pick up. But you know, I found that just in recruitment, folks just, you know, either just haven't done it yet or just don't have the time to really think about and understand their return on investment for their different outreach funnels. So this is just a quick example of an outreach funnel. So, you know, you start with that email address. The email address goes into, eventually someone applies, they submit an application, they go through interview process and hire. So the higher value goes as you get deeper in the funnel, right? Like it's going to cost more for a good hire. You know, getting, you know, a bunch of email addresses or a bunch of applications is relatively cheap. It's like, but you want to make sure you're tracking all of these different metrics. And just some quick examples. Cost per hire is, I mean, everyone should know that. Like, if you don't know your cost per hire right now, like you really need to think about that. I can help. So if you want to talk about it, sort of ballpark it, I'm happy to help there. Cost per application is a good general conversion example to think about, but I think actually probably the most important is the cost per quality applicant, right? How many folks are moving to like the real part, like beyond the phone interview, basically. So for teachers, for the most part, like that is most hiring processes. The next step after an initial phone screen is the demo lesson. How much does it cost to get those quality people that you are interested in, that you want to be in front of your kids? And then just the field of dreams, like this is sort of aspirational, but we're always going to be working toward this. But you want to get to a point where 100% of your traffic's organic. Like, you know, everybody's coming to you. You don't have to post a job. Everyone comes to you. You got 100% just referrals. That would be amazing. Your social media is just active and engaged. You know, you have families and kids, you know, responding positively on your social media, getting lots of likes on things you do. And again, this is next to impossible, but the point is you got to just get started, right? You got to find that one thing, you know, whether it's you're going to focus on your school culture, just try stuff, right? Like see what other people are doing, like try stuff, test it out. If something's not working, move on from it and try something else. But the important thing is to get started. Let me check out the chat real quick. Laura again. So would you apply all these same approaches to recruiting student teachers and college interns? So I mean, yes. You know, I think, you know, whoever your ideal candidate is, right? So that can apply to anybody, like regardless of their experience, or maybe your ideal candidate profile is, you want someone with 5+ years experience or something like that. I think the key with just student teachers in colleges, college interns it's really about the relationship. My experience is that it's about building those relationships with the schools, right? What I found when I've tried to do that, or just recruit like student teachers as a potential pipeline, especially for charters. Like a lot of them don't work with charters, so it's really about trying to build that relationship with whoever is the person that runs that or is in charge of placing folks at schools, and seeing if you can sort of get in front of those folks. Or maybe it's not like, maybe it's not having someone student teach at your school, but maybe it's like, being able to present to them or do like something like this, right? Like, hey, we have this amazing resource that we've created for student teachers that we'd love to share. And what I found with schools is they love when outside organizations come in and offer good content, right? Like they're not very good at creating content or helping their teachers find jobs, except at like, so the more traditional like places like the school districts that are kind of just like the obvious thing that folks try to get into. So if you can, reach out to them, offer some sort of resource. Like the key, like what we always try to do is we want to give folks something of value, right? For example, like this presentation, right? Like we want to work with Ruben and the Connecticut Charter Schools Association, because we want to get in front of you all to let you all know about Selected, but not just about like selling you Selected. It's about like, hey, like let us help you with your hiring process, or think about how you do virtual hiring, right? So that's kind of, I think you could also think about that in the same way with recruiting student teachers.
Jonathan, I have a question in a slightly different direction. Have you encountered anything in the virtual hiring process, like any flags around sort of any embedded biases that would either impact the pool of folks that you're recruiting, or the process itself of virtual interviewing process, that any flags or or lookouts to ensure that that you're not, that you're not inadvertently tipping the scales?
Sorry, I missed the very first part of the question.
So essentially, it's really, is there anything that you've, in doing this work, are there any flags or suggestions on, or any evidence that there's any sort of embedded biases in the virtual hiring process that would either impact the pool of folks, in other words, that would decrease the amount of quality candidates of color that you would either get in a pool, or in the process of doing the virtual interviewing? Is there anything that you've come across that are like flags or lookouts?
So I haven't directly come across anything like that, but like I'm sure that it is happening, right? So this isn't even a comment on just candidate diversity in DEI, but it's really, there are people just who aren't comfortable, right? Like this is it's a hard thing to do and to get used to. So I suspect that there's just a population of folks out there who are sort of being forced to do this, and who just, for whatever reason, just aren't prepared or just aren't comfortable with it. So either just aren't pursuing it because they don't want to do a virtual interview. So I know it's been hard for a lot of folks, but that's just sort of just anecdotal from like a few conversations I've had. But I imagine there's more to that. But as far as not, I don't really have any direct evidence of any of that happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not that it's not new technology, but it's being, I guess the level of its use of virtual hiring is increasing so quickly, so dramatically, that it's probably something we'll learn more about as we go forward in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the end of our ride together. Thank you all so much again for being with us and for participating. Just want to just open it up for questions, just any sharings. If anybody has any questions or anything to share, feel free to speak up or to include it in the chat. And then of course my information, you're welcome. So my information's here. Feel free to send me an email. I love just talent. So, and I've done it for a long time. So I love just helping folks think through just their talent processes. So feel free to reach out to talk about that or to talk about Selected. We'd love to help you all with hiring. We have lots of teachers in Connecticut looking. So if you have openings, please check us out.
Jonathan,